Aishka siam chalaja kunan kuns anatechal lekwangan sapsam tango siam school out asla asla si sapsam lekwangan tango nisla asla ksana sila ksana men di asla school out ngaka na sila nisla he was at the ngana at the chokngin at the ngaka the man nisla jasa he was at Chislam the man snes qualsimachtan aichasiam. Thank you for coming to Songhees Esquimalt land. University of Victoria is on the land of the Chukmin in the Snaka. My grandfather was chief of the Chukmin people in Snaka. My father was also from here in the Chukmin area. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, I just want to remind also everyone bakit tayo wait, ingay na ating YouTube. Yeah, I just want to remind everyone also that yeah, we are doing those land acknowledgement in due respect with this place that we are in at the moment. So yeah, sa mga bago dito sa Canada, it's in every event that you will recognize that in every event that you're gonna attend dito sa Canada that we do all the organization or do this land acknowledgement in due respect for the first people or indigenous people within this country or within this nation. So it is giving respect and honor for all of them. So to start with our session, of course, may si Arvin ba magdadasal? Or bro, or okay? Yeah, so maybe I'll just want to let's start this with the blessings and with a prayer. So we'll ask Arvin to lead us in a prayer.
Yeah, okay. Dear Lord, as we gather in this virtual space for our webinar, we seek your guidance and wisdom. Bless our efforts to share knowledge, foster connection, and promote growth. Grant us the ability to communicate effectively and engage with one another with respect and understanding. May this webinar be a source of inspiration and enlightenment for all participants. We place our endeavors in your hands, trusting that you will guide us throughout this virtual journey. Amen. Yes, Mike.
Amen. Thank you, bro.
Yeah.
Ingat sa pag-drive and maraming salamat for that. Maraming salamat sa time. And of course, no, di ko na papatagalin. So for sure, excited na kayo on this session. So just to wrap up lang from the previous session, lahat po ba dito is naka-attend or na-attendan nyo ba yung first webinar natin about this job session, about our job session? Pa-thumbs up naman. Or kung hindi po kayo makakapag-comment sa chat box. So, hello? Anybody here? Ayun. Yan. So, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Arvin, and thank some of those people, thank you, Yvette. So, I think some of the people here sa Zoom na to is first time yon na umattend for this for this session. So just to wrap up, just to get a brief lang. So on our previous session, we have discussed about on how you're going to update your CVs and paano paggawa ng and how you're gonna update also your cover letter. So after these sessions or before end of this month, we're gonna share to you, we get an approval for our speakers, na pwede na namin i-share yung ilan sa mga files niya. So we're gonna share to you, if you follow our page or register as a member of UPC, and then so you can able to access our files inside our closed group page. So please, I just want to remind again everyone to please register your membership in our registration link, so you can able to see all our files inside our closed group. So yun. So without further ado, I just wanna introduce to you one of our Lodi speaker daw, di ba? So uh, our next resource speaker is it's really close to our to UPC family, because he is a former UPC chairman also. And think ano ba profile niya? Ano ba profile niya? I will pass you all to get to more information about this speaker. I'll pass you first to Aiki.
All right. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Aiki. So, your UPC officer. So, for this second part of our Job Ready webinar, our second speaker, our resource speaker, is actually the founder of UVic Philippine community. His name is RJay Garcia. I think many of you have met him already, or may idea na kayo kung sino siya. So, ang kanya pong profile is he's a human resource assistant at the BC Public Service. So, he graduated diploma in business administration, September 2021 intake. And like I said, he was the founder and chairperson of UPC during his term around 2022 until 2023. So, aside from being a human resource assistant, he's also a mentor for the Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, or the BIPOC. He's also an employee resource group for the BC Public Service for 2023. And he actually has an extensive human resource background from the Philippines and in Saudi Arabia for, do we have to say how many years? So, more than ano na lang, more than 6 years. Oh, so medyo bata-bata si RJ. So, let's give the floor to RJ, our resource speaker.
Yes, thank you so
Okay.
much, Aiki. Can everybody hear me? Just thumbs up lang kung naririnig niyo akong lahat, or if I need to adjust yung volume or something. Hindi ko na kayo makita lahat, so I guess. Okay, may nakita naman ako
So far, okay, it's
thumbs up.
okay.
Okay, that's good. Okay, great. Before we start, I'd just like to know if we have any non-Filipino listeners dito. So far, wala ba? If you are a non-Filipino, please just give us a thumbs up so we know if we have to speak English all throughout. Wala naman. Let's see. I think wala naman nag thumbs up, so that's good. I can speak in a mixture of Tagalog and English. So hi, everybody. Again, my name is RJ Garcia. And before we start the whole session here, which is about job interviews, I just like to do my own territorial acknowledgement that I am currently living, working, and playing in the traditional and unceded territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples and the Wasanich First Nations, which are most commonly known today as the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. Yes, that's what Mike has mentioned earlier. Ginagawa natin siya just to give respect and to pay respect to the unceded territories of the First Nations na hindi naman nila freely binigay sa atin, di ba? They're allowing us to stay here. And it's part of the reconciliation with the Canadians and the First Nation peoples. So yeah, we'll just have to do as that's what Mike have mentioned. We are doing that in all of, not just with our events, but with anything that we do. Especially this, we are a visitor dito sa Canada. Hindi natin pagmamayari ang Canada or anything like that. So we are visitors, and we would just have to pay our respects. Yes, so Okay, so we'll start with the job interview session. So I believe this is the
Under the
second part.
competitors part, I added a bunch of information from the other.
Oh, sorry. So I think me. Okay. So yes, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm not sure if we're allowed to do that in between, but at the very end of the session, we'll most likely have a Q&A session. And yeah, so this is the second part of our job hunting webinar, which is mainly focused on the job interview. So we will talk about the differences between, the Filipino and the Canadian interview styles or sessions. Also, here in Canada, there's different types of interviews, like phone interviews and all that. Also, nagdi-differ din siya in terms of communication, in terms of kung ano ba yung mas gusto nila na nakikita nila sa interviews. Also, the difference between a public and a private sector. Since right now I currently work, as Aiki mentioned earlier, I currently work for the BC Public Service. So when I entered the BC Public Service, and having worked for the past 10 years or more in the private sector, I noticed the difference. So nakita ko yung difference ng kung paano yung process nila. And again, this is with just Canada. So I'm not sure with any other countries, but we're only speaking with our experiences here in Canada. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so everything that we're going to say and we're going to discuss today, just a reminder that this is based on my personal lived experiences and it may not apply to the company that you are applying for. So this is mostly just the experience that I had in the Philippines, in Saudi Arabia, and in Canada. So just take everything with a grain of salt and use this as a guidance and not that absolute truth. So let's say if I say something na ito yung nakita ko, ito yung nakita ko, it doesn't mean na yun talaga siya or that will apply to all of the companies that you're going to apply for. Okay, so just take this as as a guiding principle, and just to keep that in mind whenever you have your interviews in the future. Okay, so next slide. Give me 1 second. I-adjust ko lang actually yung screen kasi hindi ko kayo nakikita. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let's start with the question, what is a job interview? A very typical, very straightforward answer. Job interview is a type of interview in which it consists of a conversation between a job applicant and a representative of an employer. Most of the time, it's from the HR or from the department that you're actually going to be working with. And in addition, this kind of interview is conducted to assess whether or not the applicant should be hired. Thus, this interview requires your preparation and carefulness. Now, if I'm speaking too fast or too slow, please also just let me know, and then I'll be happy to adjust, okay? Because I think minsan mabilis ako magsalita, so baka hindi nyo masyadong, hindi kayo makapag-notes masyado. Okay, so next slide, please. So, before an interview, so I've heard na yung first session is all about job resumes and cover letters. So you probably know by now kung paano gumawa ng resume and how to actually fit that into Canadian profile, di ba? Sa Philippines, nilalagay pa natin yung address natin and all that, nilalagay yung age, nilalagay yung weight, nilalagay yung height, nilalagay mga kung ano-anong nakalagay sa resume natin, nakalagay yung picture. As you've known sa Canada, hindi required yon, hindi required ang age, hindi required ilagay ang kung anumang ethnicity tayo, hindi kailangan ilagay most of our physical identifiers, which is your age, your race, and your color, and all that. Even your picture, hindi nila nire-require yon. One, because Canada, as you know, is very diverse in culture and they're very inclusive. Hindi siya kailangan because we don't want to build that barrier of of discrimination sa mga nag-a-apply. So when someone is in the Philippines, pag nakita nyo sa resume ay 15 na. So from there on, hindi mo na binibigyan ng chance yung tao na ma-interview, di ba? Because you're already seeing that you already have that bias na matanda na, hindi na kailangan hindi na masyado makakapag-work or baka mahirapan mag-adjust sa work. So alam mo yun, may mga ganung bias na. In Canada, that doesn't apply. So for us, when you've already gotten your resume and your cover letter ready and invite you for interview, there are just a few things that you need to do beforehand. So hindi naman pwedeng nag-qualify na kayo, nag-screen in, and then pupunta na lang kayo basta-basta. Here in Canada, yes, they're very inclusive, but they value preparation. Okay, they value preparation. They value people who actually come to the interview, well prepared and confident. So here are a few things that you can do beforehand. First is to know about yourself to the fullest might help. One, because it's easier to be truthful and honest when you know yourself really well, diba? Sometimes, and I'm not gonna say, I'm not gonna judge anybody who did this. I've done it myself even before the next start pa lang ko na magtrabaho. Sometimes in interviews, will give you the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes white lies are, there. Will give you the benefit of the doubt kung talaga ba nangyari yan or hindi. But sometimes the only risk of providing those white lies is that, small white lies, is that pag hindi naman talaga yun nangyari sa'yo, makakalimutan mo siya, di ba? Like, it's easier to forget lies than to remember the truth. So just make sure to be prepared and know about yourself and know about the job that you're applying for. Alamin mo kung ano yung mga strengths mo and weaknesses mo from the onset so you'd know na and try to be as honest as you can. Yun nga, kasi nga mas madali siyang i-remember, mas madali siyang i-defend pag may nagtanong sa'yo, pag may nag-follow-up question sa'yo. Now, the next one to do is knowing how to overcome your nervousness. It will really help a lot. A lot of us have different ways to overcome their nervousness. One is nagpe-prepare tayo, nagpa-practice tayo in front of a mirror. Also, some of us, what I did before is kinakausap ko yung friend ko na pwede bang siya yung maging interviewer, and then tanungin mo lang ako ng whatever question and then I'll answer. So that will really help kasi it gets you in the mood and it gets you be prepared na what to expect, na marirehearse mo na yung answers mo, not in a way na magsa-sound kang very, alam mo yun, very robotic, pero in a way alam mo na kasi kung paano mo siya gagawin. So there's the fear of the unknown, medyo nawawala ng konti kasi alam mo you're prepared, di ba? So think of ways that you feel that your nervousness might go away by doing certain things. Like ako halimbawa, let's say if I have a stage fright, naglalagay ako ng barya sa sapatos, which I think is true. I don't know kung paano man siya. Pero kasi it distracts your mind away from the actual stage. Na-focus yung isip mo sa coin, parang ganun. So think of ways that will help you with your nervousness. That will really help kasi it will help in your clarity in the construction of your answers and all that. We don't expect you to be perfect na alam mo lahat, wala kang grammar mistake. Hindi namin expect yun. Not even here, not even elsewhere. Alam namin na may kaba. Pero it's just a matter of how you can, keep it at bay. Kung paano mo lang siya hindi masyadong ipahahalata na kinabahan ka. Diba? The next one is find out about possible solutions that questions that might appear, as well as possible answers. Most of us here for sure have already applied and have already worked for a couple of years. Kung meron man bago sa inyo, this is a good time to learn and to do this beforehand. But for most of us, we've already had experiences applying for a job. So most of the time, we know kung ano yung mga common questions. And don't worry, later I will give examples of common questions. So knowing those questions beforehand is a really good way to prepare for your answers. It's not wrong to have notes, especially here in Canada. In the Philippines, I think it's like frowned upon if meron kang binabasa. But in Canada, they don't really care if you have notes. Again, this is just for inclusivity. As you know, some people are not good with interviews. They understand that. Some people are not good with public speaking. They understand that. Some people are they also know that English is our second language, is not our first language. So they know that, diba? Hindi kayo dapat mag-worry because they understand those things. So bringing, a few notes to the interview will be fine as long as hindi mo lang siya naman, huwag mo naman basahin ng buong time, diba? Kasi masyado namang halata. Pero just keep it as a reference for your interview. And next one would be make sure that you understand how to explain or describe every single point inside your application document. So let's say your resume and your cover letter. May nilagay tayo doon that I can work under pressure or I can work with minimal supervision. Tapos ang problema na boy, pag may biglang dumating na na under pressure, bigla tayo, hindi ko kaya yan, ganyan, ganyan, diba? So just make sure that you can explain and you can explain every bullet point in your resume. Anything that you've said you've done in your resume, like let's say, oh, I've done this, increased profit by this. I think I've done this in my previous experience. Make sure that you're able to explain it. And again, that's what I was telling earlier with those little white lies. Pag white lie siya, minsan makakalimutan mo siya, hindi mo matatandaan. So mahihirapan ka mag-explain. But if you are as honest as you can and nilagay mo sa resume mo yung talagang ginagawa mo and you come prepared with your answers, everything will go as smoothly as it can be. Diba? And lastly, research and read about the job description and the company you are applying for. For like the 10 years that I've been working in the human resources, I think this is one of the most important things na kailangan yung gawin as an applicant. One, it just doesn't show us how, or it just doesn't show us your willingness to actually work for the company, but it shows us how knowledgeable you are and like your skill set in trying to do your research and all that, because I really think that research skills is one of the basic skills that you should have as an employee, diba? Especially if it's an office job. It's one of those few basic skills that you should have. Read the job profile, read the job description and the company. One, it'll give us that feeling na okay, ready pala talaga siya, gusto niya pala talaga kasi nag-research siya sa company, nag-research siya ng details ng about sa company. Now sa job description, from the resume session that you probably had before, or the cover letter, I'm pretty sure they've mentioned na i-edit mo yung resume mo or yung cover letter mo to tailor fit that to the job description, diba? Because most of us in human resources, sometimes we have systems, sometimes we don't. So with the systems, sometimes if you have it in your resume and then you submit your resume to us, sometimes filter niya na agad kung ano yung nasa resume mo na nagmamatch dun sa job description. If those certain keywords that are in your resume and are also in the job description, automatic papasok ka na. Alam mo yon. So automatic mag-screen in ka na. So make sure to read that job description para ma-tailor fit mo yung resume mo, and of course, for you to understand kung ano ba yung pinapasok mo, hindi naman pwedeng apply ka lang na apply, di ba? Tapos hindi mo alam kung ano yung pinapasukan mo palang trabaho. You'd have to have that full understanding of the job. The job description is there hindi para lang makita lang at para lang may ibigay sa inyo na basahin si HR or si company. It's there for you to to see a glimpse of what the job will look like. 'Di ba? Ito yung makikita mong day to day or possibly the tasks that you're going to be given. So make sure to read the job description and yes, tailor fit your resumes and your cover letter. And yes, next slide, please. Okay, so now we move on to the types of interviews. So there's a lot more. Actually, mas marami pa ang klase ng interviews. I just didn't put everything in, but the most common are these four. So the most common are phone interview, traditional interview, the panel, and the group interview. So the phone interview is actually often the first step in an interview process as a hiring manager or recruiters to screen a pool of applicants or candidates. Now, during this time, pwede ka nilang tanungin about yourself and then ask you questions about bakit kayo nag-apply, why did you apply for this job. They may also want to learn how passionate you are about the opportunity, diba? Like they might ask you like, what do you know about the company, or ba't ka nag-apply dito sa company apart against other companies, diba? So that's what I said. That's why I said na kailangan mag-research din kayo about the companies. They may use this to gauge how much you know about the role and the company. That's why the job description and the company research is important. Now, during this phone interview, if they discover that you're a quality candidate for the role, they might ask you to have the traditional interview, which is the next part of the process, or to actually visit an in-person interview for that traditional interview. Now, if you're applying for a remote position, which is common dito sa Canada, yung mga virtual remote, a phone interview could also be a formal interview. So apart from having a screening phone interview, you might have another phone interview, but that will be the actual interview now with your manager or the HR. But when interviewing over the phone, find a quiet location. Kasi sometimes pag nasa labas tayo, syempre maingay. Distractions as well, di ba? You might lose your focus. So that will be detrimental to your interview ayaw masyado kang distracted and there's a lot of noise kasi pag masyadong maingay, syempre hindi maririnig ng interviewer yung sagot mo talaga. Bring also during phone interviews, bring a list of questions that you might ask about the role, or the workplace, or the manager, or the actual hiring process. So the phone interview, which is usually for screening, is the best place for you to ask, like, what's the next step, or what's the hiring process going to look like for me, mga ganon, or what is the role about? I've read in the job description that it's this and this and this. Can you tell me more about that? So it's a good opportunity to actually engage with your recruiter or HR manager or HR representative. So use that opportunity if you were invited to a phone interview. Now, the next type of interview is a traditional interview, which is usually you and an HR representative. Again, it can be virtual or it can be over the phone or in person. A traditional interview is when you and other person meet to discuss your credentials and background as it relates to the role to which you've applied. So this is more than just a screening. It's more of getting into the resume now. It's more of getting to know you a bit more professionally. Typically, the interview is with a person such as a manager or a human resources representative or a recruiter. Now, for a traditional interview, you usually meet the interviewer at the company. Sorry, interviewin kayo in person sa office or a conference room. They may also ask you about your education, experience, and skills pertaining to the role. Now, you can prepare for this kind of interview by researching both the company and, of course, your interviewer. If you can do that, if you have the time to do that, the way to do that is to actually look at Indeed. Oh, sorry, LinkedIn. You can look for your interviewer and see their background and all that. So you can make small talks, naman. So it's a good opportunity to engage with them as well. It can also help to review the job description to refresh your memory of what the employer is seeking. Prepare responses to common interview questions, and think about what competencies and responsibilities the employer may mention. So yun lang, maging be prepared lang kayo and research about the job description and the company. Now, another interview, which is here sa Canada, if it's private companies, usually traditional and phone interview are the most common types. But with the BC Public Service, panel interview is the most common type of interview. So to those of you who are willing to or have plans to apply for the BC Public Service, expect a panel interview of at least 2 or 3 people. So in a panel interview, multiple people interview you at once. So your position may have an impact to different people's jobs or to different departments. So they are all there to actually see if magmamatch ka ba sa lahat ng department na yun, di ba? So each interviewer may ask questions regarding their department or how you might engage with their team. Now, for example, let's see what type of job. Let's see for a cross-functional job, like let's say a social media management job. So if it's a panel interview, sometimes you'll be speaking with a marketing manager and a customer service manager and a communications manager kasi lahat ng tatlong yon is mababangga mo yung trabaho mo sa kanilang tatlo, sa tatlong department na yun as a social media manager, di ba? So you'll be interviewed with the 3 people. Now, when answering each question, they ask you, you can also direct your answer to the person who asked it. So let's say if a customer service manager asked you a customer service question, then you can direct that answer to that person, diba? Or to everyone in the room. But just make sure you know where to direct your answers. And then lastly, for the group interview, this is the other way around, or sometimes it can be a mix of a panel as well. In this type of interview, a company interviews multiple people at once. So sa isang room, na-try ko to before, like I think sa second job ko, marami kami, like let's say 10 kami sa isang room na applicants, and then there's 2 interviewers. So that is called a group interview. Yun yung difference niya sa panel interview. Sa panel, ikaw lang mag-isa, pero marami yung nag-interview. Sa group is, pwede siyang panel, pwedeng iisa lang yung nag-interview, pero marami kayo na aplikante. So group interviews are common in industries like food service or hospitality. Though you may feel competitive sa group interview, always remember na hindi to pataasan ng ihe, okay? So you always have to remain polite and friendly sa ibang candidates. Hindi pwedeng binabad mouth mo yung kabila para lang ikaw yung mapansin ng interviewer, okay? So don't do that because that is a red flag. So it might help to provide answers that help you differentiate yourself as a candidate. So focus on yourself. Ano yung sa tingin mong strengths mo na magsa-stand out ka? Ganun. Pero wag naman yung magbabadmouth ka ng ibang candidate just for you to, to appear as a top candidate, okay? And then it can also help to listen to what other candidates say before you, so that you can think of a unique response, di ba? So makinig ka lang sa kanila, take into consideration kung ano yung mga nasabi na nila, and then you can just add on top of it, and then or change it how you can add more details into it just for you to stand out. Okay? Any questions so far sa type of interviews? If wala naman, we can move on to the next slide. Am I speaking too fast or too slow? Or okay lang naman? So far, wala naman ako naririnig, I think. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Jasmine. Okay. So in Canada, and not just in Canada, everywhere, there's always two types of companies. There's the public and the private companies. So let's start with the public. So public here in Canada is distinguished as either a district or municipal government, provincial government, which is the BC Public Service, federal government, which is yung parang, let's say, IRCC. So kabuuan na siya, like yung federal talaga. And then there's also crown corporations. So crown corporations, let's say BC Transit or BC Ferries, they're like a semi-public. They're considered as public, pero they're an incorporation. So that means they're big enough. They supply money to the government through the services, BC Ferries and BC Transit. But they follow most of the processes of the government. Pero hindi sila public na public, parang ganun, parang half public, half private sila. But they are considered as a public entity. And then apart from those four, all the others are private companies, so they can be businesses and stuff like that. So yes, those are the two types of companies, and these types of companies follow different processes. And again, just make sure to note kung ano man yung company na ina-applyan nyo. Try to research kung public ba siya or private, because they may have set of processes or guidelines during their interview na kailangan yung i-follow. Most of the time sa private companies, wala naman masyado silang, although their process is streamlined, pero less strict sila in terms of the interview process. Whereas sa public, medyo like, alam mo yun, parang step by step talaga siya, like kailangan i-follow, parang ganun. So that's the only difference between a private and a public company here in Canada. Just have to research on the type of company that you're applying for. Next slide. Okay, so let's say your resume was okay, you were screened in, you were invited for a phone interview, and then you screened in. Now is the actual interview na, diba? Now is your actual interview, may be face-to-face or it may be virtual. Here are some things to do during your interview, okay? So first, if it's a face-to-face or virtual, regardless of the platform that you're going to be with, dress properly once you're about to attend the job interview. Even virtual siya, don't think na, alam mo yun, na magti-t-shirt lang ako kasi virtual naman. Try to at least, diba, magmukha naman tayong professional. Although here in Canada, I don't think they really care about how you dress, pero syempre, something appropriate naman kahit pa virtual siya. So, wag tayong magsusot ng sandal or anything, diba? Wag tayong magsa-sandals pag pumunta tayo sa job interview. So, it's very self-explanatory and it's very common sense naman sa ating lahat, diba? The next one is consider your manner during the interview. Manner. So, ang pinag-uusapan ng manner dito is how you present yourself, di ba? So, one is, again, be more confident. How to do that is to practice. Yung practice and practice ka lang. Mag-try kang to speak with your friend, to act as an interviewer, or try to talk to yourself in the mirror, try to answer those questions and all that. Appear confident. Hindi naman sinabing na kailangan fully confident ka talaga kasi imposible yon, di ba? Pero try to appear confident kasi that will really, show the people or the interviewer na ready ka, di ba? Na hindi namin makahalata na kinakabahan ka or anything. So, try to be aware of your surroundings. Wag yung kung saan kang tumitingin pag ni-interview ka and all that. But that's for private companies. Later, ano natin yung difference between private and public. With the public service, kung tumitingin ka man kung saan, they won't really care about that much kasi they're being inclusive. But for private companies, sa Philippines, alam mo naman tayo sa Pilipinas, before, we always teach people not to always look the interviewer in the eye and all that kasi it appears that you're lying if you're not. Pero that's the Philippines. Dito sa Canada, they can be inclusive kasi people are neurodivergent. So some people who have disabilities have different capabilities then, diba? So some of them have mental disabilities or physical disabilities that may, appear in a different manner as what we actually want, diba? So we're being inclusive. Sa Pilipinas, wala kasing ganun eh. Parang pag hindi ka tinitingnan, parang feeling mo nagloloko na sila, diba? Nagsisinungaling na. Pero dito, don't worry about that. But at least try to appear as professional as you can and confident, okay? Next one is do not be too casual and don't be too stiff. Yun nga, wag naman yung sobrang confident ka naman kasi na magiging casual ka na lang sa interviewer mo. Although some private companies, I guess depends on which company they're applying for. Some of them might prefer that. Some company might prefer you to be really, really professional na sobrang, alam mo yun, parang kang nag-apply sa army. Pero most of the times, just try to find a balance in the between the being casual and being too stiff. So just be professional, but at least be engaging. It doesn't mean na ikaw yung ini-interview, ikaw lang ang dapat tanungin. Okay? An interview is a conversation. It's a professional conversation. It's a suitability conversation. So from the word conversation, meaning it's a two-way street. So tatanungin ka nila, most of the questions nga lang, ikaw ang sasagot. Pero there will be times that you are actually allowed to ask questions, di ba? So feel free to ask. Be casual in a way na you want to ask them questions. But of course, try to put it in a sense na yung sa work lang, di ba? Pero if they asked you something personal, feel free to ask them something personal. Pero but try to keep it professional. And again, you're free to ask any questions. Just be calm and appear confident, but not too confident. Okay. Next is minimalize your movement. So, in the Philippines, parang yun nga, sanay kasi tayo na kailangan, ano ka lang, very, ganyan ka lang yung, alam mo yun, yung parang kang army na nag-a-apply ganun in the Philippines. Dito, they're okay with it. It doesn't mean the minimalize your movement na hindi naman pwedeng sumasayaw ka na halos habang nag-i-interview ka. Hindi ka naman nag-a-apply as a theater actor, di ba? Pero, you're allowed to have movements, your hand movements and all that, as long as it doesn't get in the way, as long as it doesn't distract you or the interviewer from the point or from your point that you're trying to send across. So if it helps you to, to relieve your nervousness, kasi ako, halimbawa, pag ini-interview din ako or stuff like that, pag kinakabahan ako, pag nagagamit ko yung kamay ko, sometimes mas na-explain ko ng mabuti yung sarili ko. So it helps. It helps na to take the nervousness away if you're using your hand gestures. It also helps you sometimes to explain further, parang point by point, parang nagagamit mo yung kamay mo. But not too much na, alam mo, parang ganun ka na ng ganun. Hindi na nakikita ng tao ng interviewer yung sinasabi mo, or hindi nila nakikita yung mukha mo, hindi ka na nila naiintindihan kasi nakaka-distract na yung hand gestures mo. So try to minimalize it, but use it as you would deem necessary, okay? And then do not look away when answering the question. This applies to the Philippines mostly. Here in Canada, as much as you can, syempre preferably eye-to-eye contact. But again, in the spirit of inclusivity and respect to those people who have disabilities, that is fine. Pero kung normal naman kayo, syempre, alam mo, huwag naman kayo lumingon na, huwag naman kayong tumingin kung saan kung normal naman kayong tao. But if you don't have disabilities, try to converse with your HR interviewer eye to eye. They're very understanding. Again, they're very inclusive. So okay lang if you tend to look away. Sometimes kinakabahan tayo, so tumitingin tayo. Or sometimes pag nag-iisip tayo ng sagot natin, tumitingin tayo sa taas. That's normal, that's fine. Wag naman na buong interview nakatingin lang kayo sa taas, di ba? Mukha tayong syunga naman. Or nakatingin ka lang buong time na ini-interview tayo. So try to look at your interviewer as much as you can, and then just explain to them if you have to, look away or stuff like that. And then next one is do not take too long when answering a certain question. Sa Philippines, again, hindi ko alam kung tayo lang ba talaga to as a Filipino. Masyadong mataas ang expectations natin sa sarili natin, and yung mga interviewer mataas din ang ina-expect namin sa employees or sa candidates, 'di ba? Pero what I learned here in Canada is yun nga yung being inclusive, na hindi mo nakikita kung ano man yung mga pwedeng pinagdadaanan ng mga tao, 'di ba? So um it's fine if here in Canada, it's fine if you don't answer the question right away. It's fine if you're gonna say to the interviewer, can you give me 3 seconds? Can you give me a few seconds just to arrange my thoughts and on that answer? Or can I get back to that? Can I skip that question and get back to that later? I just need to think about my answer. That is fine. Totally okay lang yan dito. And it's much better na maging honest ka na ganun rather than pilitin mo yung sagot mo tas dahil na time pressure ka, your answer is all over the place, mali-mali na mali-mali na yung answer mo, hindi na naintindihan yung interviewer yung answer mo kasi minadali mo siya, pinilit mo, pinressure mo yung sarili mo. Here in Canada, that's fine. As long as you be honest with it, diba? If you need time to answer, tell them to revisit the answer later. Can we skip that question and I'll answer that later when I have the chance. So ganun. Just be honest. So okay lang yan. Next one is listen carefully to the questions. You are free to have the interviewer repeat or paraphrase the question. Huwag kayong mahiya na tanungin sila ulit. Because they know that English is not our first language, so understandable naman yun. They know that, and that doesn't take away a point or does not take away a mark sa interviewer mo. But again, everything is to an extent, di ba? Wag naman yung sa lahat ng questions, pina-repeat mo sila ng 5 times. Wag naman yung ganun, Besh. Di ba? Parang masyado naman. So, just listen carefully. Have them repeat once or twice if you really can't understand it. You can have them repeat it once, the exact same thing. But if sa pangalawang beses hindi mo siya naintindihan, ask them to paraphrase the question. Ask them to rephrase it na sa way na maiintindihan mo. So during that time they will understand na kailangan nilang baguhin yung alam mo yun, yung wordings doon. So if there's a word that you are not able to understand, that just be honest. Mas ma-appreciate nila yung honesty rather than trying to assume and then at the end of the day mali yung sagot mo. And then engage with the interviewer or interviewers. So yun yung sinasabi natin kanina. Again, this is a professional conversation. It's a suitability conversation. And hindi ibig sabihin na ikaw yung interviewee, ikaw lang kailangan lahat sumagot. So engage with them, ask them questions about the job, about the role, about the culture of the office, the environment, what else? What is the day-to-day like sa role na yon, or why did the person leave, mga ganun. So try to engage and they'll really appreciate that kasi again andun yung enthusiasm mo and interest sa company talaga, and you really want to know more about it. And then lastly here, focus on your relevant achievements. Siyempre, when someone asks you tell me about yourself, hindi ibig sabihin na sasabihin mo yung, ano ba, I have 2 cats and 2 dogs, diba? I mean, nag-apply ka ng job interview, hindi mo pinopost to sa Facebook, di ba? So try to focus on your relevant achievements. So tell me about yourself. So I've been working this. So tell me about your professional achievements or any certificates or any education that is related, and then relevant skills and achievements. So I got a professional development certificate in business communication, blah blah blah, which I believe will help in this job application, blah blah blah. So mga ganon. So wag naman yung mga non-relevant information. Kasi one, most of the interviews can be timed, especially sa busy public service, it is timed. So if magbablab ka ng masyadong matagal with irrelevant information, maubos yung oras mo. And with private companies, syempre, with private companies, they're more lenient. Sometimes you can squeeze that in sa mga answers mo, that gives an opportunity to have that rapport with your interviewer. But if you feel na sa first attempt mo hindi sila nag-respond, parang dead ma lang sila, then try to move away from that, di ba? Wala namang masama kung gawin mo siya, kung itatry mo siyang i-attempt. Pero just gauge the environment if you feel na parang wala ka namang nakuha in return. So huwag mo na lang i-open up. Huwag ka na lang magganon sa next time. Parang focus na lang on professional answers. Okay? Okay. Next slide, please. So now, nasa interview ka na. You will be asked different types of questions, and these are just the three common types of interview questions. Mas marami pa, so hindi ko na lang sinama kasi masyadong marami. But the most common are traditional, and then the behavioral or situational or competency-based. And then the last one is a knowledge or a skill-based question. So the traditional interview question is, describe yourself, reasons why. It's mostly you and your education and your skills as well. Na parang bakit ka umalis sa trabaho, motivation mo, mga ganon, strengths and weaknesses, um, ano ba ba, mga tell me about yourself, or how do you see yourself 4 to 5 years from now, mga ganon. So that's like the traditional HR questions. And they're very easy to answer. Siguro hindi mo na kailangang i-note yan kung alam mo na that's personal naman, so matatandaan mo yan. But then the other type of question here in Canada, nung sa mga private companies na in-applyan ko, most of the time they use traditional questions, like very traditional, like ba't ka umalis sa previous job mo, gaano katagal ka doon, ano yung work mo doon, ba't ka umalis, ano yung nakikita mong future dito sa company, ba't ka nag-apply dito. So sa private companies na na-workan ko dito sa Canada, most of the time gagamitin talaga nila is traditional questions or knowledge-based questions, which is, alam mo yun, knowledge about the job. So let's say kung accounting, tatanungin ka, ano sa baka mamaya pag-computein ka, di ba? So yun yung knowledge questions. So most of the time, private companies will use traditional or knowledge-based. But for the BC Public Service, there's very high percentage that they will not ask you any traditional question, but they will most likely use a behavioral situational competency or a knowledge skill-based question. So yun yung difference ng public and private dito sa Canada na napansin ko. So let's discuss now behavioral, situational, or competency-based. Behavioral, situational, or competency-based will gauge how you will respond to specific work-related scenarios to determine your reaction based on previous experience. It will also it can also help the interviewer gauge your self-confidence, decision-making skills, communication skills, and level of experience. So dito um, hindi na siya yung, alam mo yun, kasi sa traditional question, fixed na yung sagot mo eh. Alam mo yun, reasons why you left your job. Oh, I got terminated. Oh, looking for better opportunity. Alam mo yun, canned na yung responses mo eh. Alam mo na yun eh. But with behavioral, situational, or competency-based, it's more of makikita nila kung ano yung personality mo and attitude mo towards work. So they will most likely ask, so the role requires teamwork or requires working with a team. Can you give us a time where you had to work with a team or you had disagreements with the team, and how did you overcome it? So doon, with that question, that's a competency-based question, which is teamwork, di ba? Doon magigauge yung ability mo on your communication skills. Ano yung mga ginawa mo if nangyari yun sa'yo? So, sasabihin mo dyan is, oh, ito yung situation ko, blah, 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 ito yung nangyari, and then ito yung mga ginawa ko, tapos ito yung naging result, di ba? In behavioral, situational, and competency-based questions, we always recommend for you to use the STAR method. If you guys know what STAR method is, the STAR method is S for situation, T for task, A for action, R for results. You can use this not just in the public sector, kasi ito very common siya sa BC Public Service, yung STAR method na sinasabi, but you are free to use that in the private sector, and that will actually help you, get the role, kasi it will not just help your answer be more detailed, but it will be very informative, and yung structure niya is in a way na madaling intindihin. It's very clear pag finalo mo yung situation, task, action, and results. So let's say with the teamwork question, ano yung give us a time that you had problems with your teammates and how did you resolve it, diba? So situation is, oh, back in my experience in 2016, I was handling blah, blah, blah. I was with a team of 10. And as a team member, I was responsible for, giving customer service, excellent customer service. But at the same time, I had to deal with my teammates and make sure that our team reaches, the end goal of having, meet our goals, our professional goals, or the company's goals. And then the tasks. So as a team member, yun nga, kailangan ma-meet namin yung goal. There was one time na nagkaroon nga ng disagreement between a colleague, and my task, of course, as a team member is to address that and to make sure that it won't affect our professional experience and our professional job. And we will not take that personally, blah, 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 hindi mo siya- mga ganon. So that's like you're explaining your task. So the situation, you'll explain the situation, kung ano man yung na-experience mo, and your task, kung ano yung role mo. So kung manager ka, my task is of course to mediate between the two employees, blah blah blah, and all that. So yun yung task. And then action. Doon ka na maglalatag kung ano yung mga ginawa mo. So I started, if you're a manager, I started talking to one of the employees, and then I arranged another meeting with the second employee, and then I arranged another meeting to have all of three of us, and then we discussed blah 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 blah. And then I had to ask questions, I had to do a deep dive analysis, blah blah blah. So yun yung actions mo. So ilalatag mo na doon kung ano yung mga ginawa mo. And then lastly, results. So results would be, so at the end of the day, um, I was able to, you know, to maintain the harmony of the team, blah, 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 during because of those meetings and all that. So yung results, basta you talk about all the results and all that. And you can also talk about your learnings and challenges. So with this, sa dami kong sinabi, sa competency-based, makikita namin kung ano yung thought process mo. Hindi lang yung gusto ko maging doktor, gusto ko maging ganyan, gusto ko maging manager. Makikita namin kung paano ka mag-isip as a person, 'di ba? So kung mangyari man sa iyo 'to, paano ka mag-isip? Like ano yung mga steps na gagawin mo para ma-achieve mo 'yon? So that's how behavioral, situational, and competency-based questions are. So you'd have to really prepare. And again, dahil marami siya, it's okay if you have notes. Okay, so that's behavioral one. And then the last question is, we'll move on to knowledge or skill-based. This is also one of the questions that can be asked in both private and public. Most common siya sa both. Kasi obviously, if it's, let's say, a very technical job, let's say an accountant, so medyo important na syempre marunong ka talagang mag-accounting, di ba? So it allows the interviewer to understand your knowledge and proficiency with role-specific technologies, practices, tools, and regulations. So pag accountant ka, syempre kailangan marunong ka talaga mag-accounting. So baka pagsagutin ka ng kung ano mang mga formula dyan or something, or reconciliation. Pag, let's say, ano pa ba mga ano, like let's say food service. So syempre kailangan marunong ka talaga like mga food safety and all that, 'di ba? Or pag sa liquor store ka, syempre mga liquor handling, mga ganun. So tatanungin ka nila, what would you do, ganyan ganyan. Or if sa food safety, parang ano ba yung naalala ko sa food safety na tanong nun, parang kailangan gaano katagal, yun? Parang kailangan ilang meters magkahiwalay ba yung perishable tsaka mga ganon. So very technical question siya. So yun yung most common din sa public and private companies. So just be ready for those. So for public, it's mostly behavioral and knowledge. For private, it's mostly traditional and knowledge based. Yun. Next question. Sorry, next slide. Any questions so far? Wala naman. None. Okay. So far, wala. Okay, so get started with a job interview. So before directly heading to specific questions, usually you would be asked to describe or tell the one interviewing you about yourself first. Even with the public sector, may time din na talagang pinag-i-introduce yung isa't isa. Pero again, because it's timed sa public service, and there's really not a lot of time as compared to a private company interview, kasi sa private company, parang wala silang pakiang gaano katagal kayong tumagal usually. Pero pag public service or sa public sector, usually it's really time kasi sobrang busy ng mga tao and may mga specific schedules lang na naka-hold. So try to just give yourself a brief background. Yun lang naman. Next slide. So, the most common question na lahat ng ating mga kababayan ay obviously na-experience na, just tell me about yourself. But there are here are some things na very helpful na sasabihin mo about yourself. So obviously yung name mo, if you think that it's necessary, and then your latest education or your most relevant education. You may have, you may have a different degree and a different master's, or you may have double degree. So tell them about the most relevant education na dun sa job na ina-applyan mo, and then your experience as well as your achievements, if any. So choose the best one or two related ones to represent you. Again, like I mentioned, okay, it doesn't really matter kung magsabi kayo ng like mga personal stuff about sa inyo, like, oh, I am a married, I'm married with 4 kids and all that, or I have 2 cats, blah blah blah. So it's fine if you think that it will add up or it will add value to your interview, or if you're trying to build rapport, but it's not a requirement. And if you feel na your attempt to build rapport is not reciprocated, then alam mo yun, try to focus more on the professional ones, professional achievements, professional experiences, and all that. Pero yeah, just be aware of what your like your time limit are. Kasi baka yun nga, baka time limited lang kayo, so hindi na, wala na masyadong time to engage, but try to speak more of the professional experience. And then next, so now we'll give you some common and possible questions a job interview. I think this is one of those ones that you might want to take a note of, kasi you can prepare your questions or your answers in advance. So it really helps if you're prepared and if you have notes and you're well prepared and alam mo na yung mga possible questions, kasi ina-expect mo na siya. Again, there's that fear of the unknown. Kaya tayo minsan kinakabahan kasi hindi natin alam kung ano yung mga tatanong. But if you prepare sa mga common questions, mawawala na yung fear of the unknown, di ba? Parang, alam mo, it's just a matter of how you actually answer it na lang pag nandun ka na sa interview. So here are some possible or common questions. So what do you know about this company, or about what interests you about the role? That's very common na tinatanong here in Canada. Why are you leaving, or why did you leave your previous job? Usually sa private companies yan, but most of the time they don't really care. Unless it's a reference check, because sa references usually doon nila tatanungin yan kung bakit umalis yung tao and all that. So they won't really ask you. Sa Philippines, tinatanong nila yan. Pero dito, I've never experienced na tinanong kung bakit daw ako umalis sa previous company ko. They usually ask that sa reference check dun sa mismong supervisor ko before kung ba't ako umalis. And then what are your strengths and weaknesses? Don't worry about this. I know this question can be a bit difficult to answer, especially yung weaknesses na yan, kasi there are answers na hindi naman technically mali, pero that will be a red flag sa company. So what are the types of answers na you can say as a weakness na hindi ka magmumukhang walking red flag para sa company, di ba? So we'll get to that in a bit. And then where do you see yourself in the upcoming 4 to 5 years? So that's mostly common in private companies. And then tell us about the time. So yan yung behavioral or situational or competency based. It's more of gusto nila ikaw yung magbigay ng experience or ng information, tapos papakita mo sa amin kung paano mo siya niresolbahan. Ganun. And then knowledge or skill based. So yun nga, if it's an accounting role yan, baka matanong ka ng X plus Y equals Z, mga ganun. So hindi natin alam. Skill based reconciliation and all that. So it really depends sa job din na ina-applyan mo. If it's an engineer, baka mamaya may pagawin sa yung something. So mga ganun. Next slide. And then more examples. Sa next slide. So why should we hire you? So sometimes private companies will ask that. In the public sector, they won't ask that. Why should we hire you? What makes you unique? Hindi rin siya tinatanong usually sa BC Public Service or sa public sectors. Usually they would ask that in the private sector. What is your greatest challenge, and how do you deal with or overcome or cope with that? So that is a situational or behavioral question. So ito, talagang pagchichikahin kayo ng matagal. So talagang my greatest challenge is this and this and this, and as as a person who's this and that, this is how I would address it. So these are the steps that I would take. Blah blah blah. List that down, bullet points nyo kung gusto nyo, and then at the end of the day, I was able to overcome this, blah blah blah, because of the steps that I actually take. So ganon. Sa mga ganitong questions, again, it's really helpful if you really did the STAR method, and not just if you're applying with the public service, but again, it's really helpful then sa any company na a-applyan nyo, kasi it will help with clarity, and it will help with your structure and organization of your thoughts. Kasi alam mo yung pagkakasunod-sunod. And then how do you handle your stress, sorry, especially when it comes to the work that you're doing. What is the most successful team you have been a part of, and how did you contribute to its success? Yan, parang sa lahat ng in-applyan ko dito, parang 3 times na akong tinanong yan. especially sa busy government, parang ang dami beses ako natanong yan sa interview. Pero sa private companies din, parang sa dalawa kong in-applyan or tatlo, tinanong din yan kasi important sa kanila yung, alam mo yun, yung teamwork and all that. Give me an example of a time when you made the wrong decision. What was the outcome and what would you do differently? And then describe a complicated problem that you've had to deal with. How did you solve it? What was the result? So usually yun yung mga common questions na even not just here, sa Pinas na experience ko din yan na tinanong namin sa mga applicants or I myself have experienced that. But it's better again if you have those. Kasi kahit hindi man yan yung exact na question nila sa'yo, you could use that in a different question. So as long as you have that canned response, madali na siyang i-edit. Madali nang i-edit yung answers mo and mas magiging confident ka kasi prepared ka na. Alam mo na yung isasagot mo. Okay? So next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. So, like what I mentioned earlier, yung weaknesses actually isa sa mga questions yan na sobrang hirap sagutin. Kahit ako, nahirapan ako dati sagutin yan. Like, ano ba yung mga tama or maling sagot sa weaknesses? Kasi baka may pag sinabi kong, oh, I'm this, baka isipin naman nila, ano, di ba, parang walking red flag naman to. So, may mga answers na dapat hindi natin sabihin, may mga answers na dapat na pwedeng ma-relate natin siya to the job. So just be professional about it. So here are some answers that you could use if someone asks you about your weaknesses na magmumukhang professional ka pa rin naman and hindi ka magmumukhang, red flag. Next slide. Okay. So when you are encountering an interview, you would probably be dealing with a question, what are your strengths and weaknesses, like I've said. So this type of question is supposed to be easy to answer as it refers to your personalities. However, it does not work that way for most people as they are afraid of bragging too much or risking it. Now, therefore, you would probably need to learn how to deal with this type of question, considering that even the most experienced candidate would also be struggling with it. It is important to be prepared when it comes to these kinds of questions. Now, ako nilagay ko dito, there are 5 things na lagi kong tinatandaan when I'm answering the question like, what are your weaknesses? Mga ganon. Very, very simple, di ba? Na very simple ng question. Pero sometimes it can make or break your interview pag nakita nilang red flag ka. So here are some tips na you can actually use when answering that question. So first is choose a genuine weakness, diba? So select a genuine weakness that you have identified in yourself. This could be a skill that you're working on improving or a trait that you're trying to manage better. So it's essential to be honest. Basta honest ka and truthful ka about it, as insincerity can be detected and may reflect poorly on you. So yung sinasabi ko na pag walang problema kung gusto mo gumamit ng mga white lies and all that, we will give you the benefit of the doubt. Hindi namin sasabihin na totoo ba yan, parang ganun. Hindi ka naman namin tatanungin, di ba? Pero as much as possible, be genuine about a weakness kasi, again, pag mas truthful ka, mas madedefend mo yung sagot mo. Mas hindi ka magra-ramble and all that. And then next is reframe it as a development opportunity. So once you have chosen a genuine weakness, i-reframe mo siya na professionally na may ginagawa ka talagang steps to actually address your weakness. So rather than framing your weakness as a negative aspect, present it as an area for growth and development. So let's say masyado akong meticuloso, parang ganon. But what I'm actually doing is I'm taking things slowly and I'm looking at the bigger picture. I'm trying to take steps in this by doing this and this and this and that. So i-frame mo siya na very professional ka and talagang gumagawa ka ng steps both professionally and personally to address that. Na hindi yung sasabihin mo lang, perfectionist ako or masyado ako meticuloso so wala na sino magagawa. Parang yun lang talaga. Alam mo yun, parang okay. So wala na sila masasabi. So parang red flag na yun. And if you do that, if you're reframing it in such a way, this demonstrates self-awareness and a proactive attitude, 'di ba? Yun nga, yung sinasabi na ikaw mismo may proactiveness ka na work on mo yung weakness na yon towards a personal and professional improvement. So important yon. So genuine weakness and then reframing it as a development opportunity. And then the third step is to show what steps you're taking to improve, as what I've mentioned earlier. So after discussing the weaknesses, explain the steps you're taking to address it. This could involve, seeking training, seeking feedback from your managers, or from your colleagues, or actively practicing the skill. Now, demonstrating your commitment to self improvement highlights your dedication and initiative to overcome challenges. Pag nakikita nila na may ginagawa ka doon para ma-address yon, hindi lang yung pag may nangyaring masama or may nakita ka negative sa'yo, wala ka nang gagawin. It shows stubbornness sa tao, di ba, sa interviewer. But if you acknowledge that you are um, weak in a certain aspect of the work and you're trying to proactively seek training, seek advice from your professors and all that, or from your managers, then makikita nila that you're a person who's really willing to learn and willing to grow and develop within the company. Okay, so the fourth step is actually relating it to the job. So whenever possible, syempre, whenever possible lang naman, tie your weakness to the specific requirements of the job you're interviewing for. This shows that you understand the role and you have thought about how to mitigate any potential risks in relation to it. So let's say nag-apply ka as a project analyst or something, or a policy or something that works with policies. So we're looking for someone who's very detail oriented kasi syempre babasahin mo yung policies and all that, 'di ba? Um, Pwede mo siyang sabihin na weakness mo kasi although the job requires being detail oriented, I think that is also considered as my weakness, because when I'm being too detail oriented, I forget the bigger picture. I forget the whole policy. I'm just only looking at one specific part of that policy instead of looking at the bigger picture. So in that sense, what I'm doing is that I'm reaching out to my colleagues or to my managers on the necessary steps that I could do to actually address that concern. So, and that ties back to, as a policy analyst, I don't think it'll just be you're just looking for someone who's detail oriented, but also looks at, the bigger picture. So, parang ganun siya. Ibabalik mo siya dun sa trabaho na kung ano man yung weakness mo, magagamit mo pa rin siya. At kung ano yung ginagawa mong improvement is magagamit mo pa rin siya dun sa trabaho. Okay, so related to the job. So, there's 4 steps na. So, choose a genuine weakness, reframing it as a development opportunity, show us what steps you're taking to improve, and then relating it to the job. The last step is obviously avoiding the red flags. Be cautious not to mention weaknesses that are essential for the job or could raise red flags. So let's say if you're applying for a position that requires strong attention to detail, admitting to being disorganized might not be the best choice, diba? So someone, let's say admin ka, and then sasabihin mo na, um, actually, sarili kong, my weakness is being disorganized and all that. But I'm actually, although sasabihin mo na, oh, I'm actually working on that by doing sticky notes and all that. Pero syempre parang, alam mo yung medyo red flag pa rin siya kasi important part of the job siya. And you framed it in a way na parang hindi siya very professional. Parang sinasabi mo na disorganized ka sa buhay mo. Parang ganun, di ba? So you'd have to just be professional, focus on the things na medyo professional, and then take the steps, and then give us the steps, and then i-relate mo siya sa job. So also don't focus on, let's say, isang point din na lagi kong naririnig before, sinasabi na, oh, I'm a workaholic. What I suggest is it's not really the strongest answer na sasabihin natin, oh, I'm a workaholic, so magtatrabaho talaga ako. I'll work hard sa company. I don't think, like, based on my experience and from my past experiences, it's not really a good answer to say that you're workaholic, because it means that you cannot balance your work and your personal life. Kasi sabi mo workaholic ka, so ibig sabihin, you're very bad at time management. Masyado kang nagtatrabaho, hindi mo fina-focus yung, may personal life ka naman, hindi naman pwedeng work lang, di ba? Although sa Philippines, ganun siguro yung pinaano sa atin na kailangan trabaho lang, di ba? Pero dito, it can be a negative thing if you say you're too workaholic, kasi that means you cannot balance your life. And dito very particular sila na kailangan talaga hindi ka nag-overtime, blah blah blah, and they value their personal lives din. Pag nawawalan sila ng time sa personal life nila, talagang magkakaroon ng problema, not just with you and with your managers. So I suggest not to say that you're workaholic. Lastly, just to recap all that, like just give realistic and professional weaknesses and separate your character or personality weaknesses, which will not be valuable to the company. So anything na you think will be professional lang, na wag niyo sabihin na I'm very disorganized. I'm very perfectionist. Parang mga alam mo yun, kasi masyadong personal yun eh. So it won't really help you with your job. Um, but don't worry, I'll give you a few things that you can actually say. Can we move on to the next slide, please? There. So here are 5 things that you can actually say when someone asks you what your weaknesses are. So here are 5 things that I think would really be helpful sa job mo, sa job na ina-applyan mo. And you won't be like a walking red flag para sa mga employers. So the first one is too detail-oriented na kanina binigay ko na example yan. Too detail-oriented or overly analytical. So for that, while attention to detail is often valued, extreme perfectionism can sometimes lead to delays or inefficiencies, diba? So you could explain that you're working on finding a balance between striving for excellence and meeting deadlines efficiently. So yun nga, pag detail-oriented ka, you can say, I'm very detail-oriented, but because, and I understand that the implications of that is, the time that it takes me or the time that I have to take to provide quality work, diba? So that can be a negative thing. But what I'm actually doing right now is I'm taking things slow. I'm looking at the bigger picture, and I'm trying to find the balance by taking in, trainings on management and all that, or time management and all that. So yun yung mga pwede mong sabihin. Kaya maganda siyang sabihin kasi itatay mo siya dun sa role and very professional siya. And then next one is difficulty with public speaking. Lahat naman tayo hindi talaga sanay. We were not born to be a public speaker. Lahat tayo. So especially here in Canada, English is not our first language. So they will understand, and that is the most common na pwede natin gamitin. So we're not very good with public speaking. But the way to address that is that we all know that this is a common weakness na marami sa ating nakaka-experience. But you could mention that you're actively working on improving your presentation skills by, let's say, joining public speaking clubs or taking relevant courses in communications and all that, or Toastmasters. So that one, since communication plays a vital role in any industry, diba? Yung communication skills mo, you could have that as your weakness, but reframing it in a professional way na sabihin mong you're improving your presentation skills by, actively volunteering when I have group projects, when we have group presentations at school. So, alam mo yun, at least doon makikita nila tinatay mo siya sa student work mo, o sa student life mo, and then professional life. So, magandang sabihin siya as an employee. And then the next one will be the delegation. Delegation is applied usually when you're a supervisory or a managerial role, but even if you're not, even if you're just a team member, that is also important to learn the skill of delegation. So delegation is, of course, if marami ka ng trabaho, so pwede mo siyang i-assign sa ibang tao para tulungan ka. So that's delegation. If you tend to take on too much responsibility and struggle with delegating tasks, you could mention that you're learning to trust your team members more and are practicing effective delegation techniques. So maganda siya na sabihin mo kasi sometimes you're taking on a lot of responsibilities, diba? So as a student, blah blah blah, as a student and as also a worker, very relevant siya sa atin ngayon. And as a family, as someone with kids, it's sometimes hard to manage my responsibilities. But I am now learning more to, let's say, to trust my husband to do this and blah blah blah, or actually trust my classmates to do this part of the presentation and all that, yung mga ganon. So delegation is a skill na pwede mong sabihin as a weakness and that you're trying to learn from it kasi that would be really helpful even in all types of companies. And then next is difficulty saying no. Bilang Pinoy tayo oo lang tayo ng oo. Very very relatable 'yan. Parang as an Asian, mahirap talaga sa atin na mag-say no kasi sila mga puti pag sinabi nilang ayaw talaga nila, sasabihin nila sa mukha mo. No, I cannot do that, 'di ba? Pero tayo kasi parang, okay po, sige, try ko po, parang mga gano'n tayo, 'di ba? So, we have that weakness of difficulty of saying no. So you could have that. You could say that. If you have a tendency to take on too many tasks or have trouble prioritizing your workload, you could discuss how you're working on setting boundaries and learning to say no when necessary. Highlight that you're improving your time management skills, becoming better at assessing your capacity before committing to let's say new projects and all that. Emphasize that this allows you to focus more effectively on the tasks and deliver high quality results. So para din siyang delegation almost na sasabihin mo na I'm trying to do this by delegating as well, trusting my team members, and then also managing my time really well, focusing one task before doing the others, and then if I don't feel and then by looking at my tasks I can assess if I can actually take on more projects. So maganda siyang very relatable siya sa atin as Filipinos, but at the same time you're making it very professional. You're tying the experience or the actions that you're saying is very professional. So yung steps na ginagawa mo to be better is very professional. Like yun nga, like the notes ka and all that. And then lastly, lack of technical expertise. It's okay to say na hindi mo alam yung kung ano man kung ano yung technical expertise na kailangan nila. That's also a weakness. Some of the technical jobs, so let's say if you're a graphic artist or yeah, let's say a graphic artist, let's say maraming mga programs na ginagamit, 'di ba? Mga kung ano-anong applications na ginagamit to actually do the job. Pero let's say sa job description, there's one there na hindi mo alam, yung isang application na hindi mo alam, but most of it you alam mo, you can say that as a weakness. Like I am lacking the technical expertise in this type of application. So if a job actually requires a certain level of technical expertise that you're still developing, you can acknowledge that as a weakness. However, demonstrate your willingness to learn. So by mentioning relevant courses or mga certifications or self-study initiatives. So I'm actually let's say nakita mo siya sa kung saan man sa Coursera or something, you're actually trying to learn that, blah blah blah. I'm actively taking certifications to know more or to learn more about that expertise or that field. So mga ganun. This will give us the understanding that you're actually enhancing your skills, diba? So hindi naman alam naman nila na hindi ka forever magiging entry level position. At least from there you can show us that even if you're lacking technical expertise, you are very proactive in improving yourself and you see the company as something or as a place that you can actually improve on, diba? So emphasize your eagerness to expand your knowledge and your ability to grasp, or to learn new skills. So those are the type of things na these are the five things na marami pa dyan for sure na pwede nyo gamitin as weaknesses, but these are the five common things na I think we can actually relate to as Asians, na pwede nating sabihin as a weaknesses na hindi tayo magmumukhang walking red flag, but at the same time, it will look like very professional, and then we're eager to learn more, we're eager to change, we're doing steps, and they're quite easy to answer in a way na madali lang makapag-isip ng mga pwede mong actions na gagawin. Like sa delegation, trusting your team members more, lack of technical expertise, I'm taking certificates now, or I'm taking, the DBA program or whatnot. So yun, madali siyang ma-action, madali siyang magawa ng paraan. Next slide, please. So just some tips here to deal with this kind of question is to explain briefly and clearly to avoid unnecessary information. With the BC Public Service, again, it's timed. It's a timed interview most of the time. With the BC Public Service, it's not less is more. So masyadong konti yung sinabi mo pag sa public sector ka, medyo ano yun, medyo kabado ka na nun kasi ibig sabihin wala ka masyadong binigay ng information. But for private companies, sometimes less is more. Sometimes mas gusto nila na you're very concise and talagang straight to the point, di ba? Whereas sa public sector, gusto nila sobrang detail mo. Kailangan ilatag mo talaga lahat ng experiences mo or yung mga specific na ginawa mo talaga. Like, nag-set ako ng meeting ganyan, nag-set ako ng meeting ganyan. Kailangan specific talaga kahit mga random things. And then when telling your weaknesses, give the truest information. Kasi again, mahirap kung sabi ng white lie, makakalimutan mo, baka mamaya i-revisit yung question, tanungin ka ulit, nakalimutan mo na yung sagot mo, di ba? But arrange your words carefully to minimize the risks. So making sure that you recognize the weakness, those 5 steps, recognize the weakness. What's the second one, if anyone remembered? Recognize your weakness, reframe it as a developmental opportunity, show us the steps and how you actually overcame it, and then relate it to the job. So yun yung 4 steps. And then mentioning what have you been doing. And then lastly is obviously being convincing when you're telling your strengths and your weaknesses to rise to the possibilities of being hired. Also mentioning the strengths that have relation to the job, not just the strengths, but the weaknesses that are related to the job. Don't be too confident kasi magmumukha ka namang bragging, di ba? Although, um, benefit of the doubt, we don't really know, but as much as possible, just be professional, just find the balance between casual and, professionalism. Okay, next slide. Okay, so just something here to note that it is actually okay to not be able to answer a certain question. There are times na hindi natin alam yung sagot sa question, and that's fine. Here in Canada, that's totally fine. Sa Philippines, parang ibabagsak ka na kaagad niyan. Dito sa Canada, that's fine. Do not panic when it happens to you. However, you cannot just leave the answer as I don't know, 'di ba? Kahit saan naman, pag sinabi mo talagang I don't know lang, talagang ibabagsak ka. So give us justification. You must add at least a response or a reason to your answer. In addition, you could also ask time to think about the answer if possible. Skip and go to the next question and get back to the question later with the answer. Again, that's totally fine. Huwag kayong mangamba kung hindi nyo alam agad yung sagot right then and there. You can ask to skip a question, ask them to rephrase or repeat it, or go back. Some answers that you could actually use is that I'm sorry or I apologize. Is it possible that we talk about this question later? I've been in that kind of situation, but I just need more time to arrange my answer. So okay lang yan kung hindi ka talaga ready. You can say that. At least it's very professional, and that you're being honest na hindi mo na alam mo yung sagot, pero kailangan mo lang ng time to think about it. And then if you don't know actually the answer, while I'm not familiar with that topic, I'm always eager to learn and expand my knowledge. Or could you tell me more about that? So mga ganon. So parang, alam mo yun, nag-engage ka rin at the same time, you're being honest sa interviewer na hindi mo talaga alam. Kung hindi mo alam, edi hindi mo alam, wala ka namang magagawa. Like, it's better to just be honest. Rather than magpapabibo tayo tapos mali naman yung sagot natin, diba? So, mali pa rin. Or you can try to redirect the question. So let's say, tinanong ka, and then you can answer, well, I'm not familiar with that. I can speak to my experience related in blah, blah, blah. So let's say teamwork. Very, very common yung teamwork. Let's say teamwork question. Tinanong ka, was there a time na nag-away kayo ng mga team members mo? And then, anong ginawa mo? Let's say, very extrovert ka talaga, very friendly ka talagang tao, di ba? Very Jollibee ka. So, wala ka talagang experience na nakipag-away ka sa mga ka-team mo, di ba? So, pwede mo sabihin na I have not really had any experiences with that, but I can speak to my experience related to, being a team and how I engaged with my team and how we were able to maintain a harmonious relationship and all that. So, ganon. So, tapos sasabihin mo na yan, ilatag mo na, habaan mo na lang. Like, magbigay ka na lang ng more details about it. Like, ano yung mga nangyari, blah, 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 ano yung mga ginawa mo, and all that. So, it's okay if hindi mo alam, but there are ways to say them or to tell them na hindi mo siya alam. Just be honest. And there are ways na magmukha ka pa rin professional even if you don't know it. You can ask them to repeat it, rephrase it, skip it and go back at a later time, or you can redirect the question. So, pag hindi mo talaga siya na-experience, yung tinanong sa'yo, yung situation, hindi mo naman talaga siya na-experience, alam mo magsinungaling ka, di ba? So, redirect it to something that's related, di ba? So, yun. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, recap na pala. So, just a recap on all or everything that we've talked about today. Ito yung mga very important points na kailangan nyo tandaan lang. First is research the company and understand the job description. Very important siya. Mag-research kayo about the company. Kahit yung website, basahin nyo or anything like that, and anything in particular na information that struck you the most, mga ganon. And then you can use that as a rapport to the interviewer and all that. and it shows genuine enthusiasm and interest. And then understand the job description kasi if you don't understand the job, di ba, ba't ma-applyan kung di mo naman alam yung gagawin mo? And it will just be a negative note on your interview kung hindi mo talaga binasa yung job description. Kasi one, hindi mo masasagot yung mga questions ng maayos, or two, kung napasa mo man at talagang you faked it till you made it at dumating ka sa point na yon, um, tapos ginagawa mo na yung trabaho, tapos hindi mo alam yung gagawin mo, na hindi mo alam na kailangan mo pala siyang gawin, tapos hindi mo alam, ikaw lang din yung magsasuffer in the end, di ba? So, masakit lang siya kung i-lay off ka dahil doon, di ba? So, understand the job description and read it. Next is practice common interview questions. In the BC Public Service, binibigay ang questions usually in advance. In private sectors, hindi. But again, in the private sectors, it's usually the traditional ones na madaling yung mga common lang na tinatanong, or knowledge-based questions. But if it's BC Public Service or public sector where it's competency-based or behavioral questions, most of the time they will give it hours in advance. And then show confidence and enthusiasm and interest, obviously. Don't be too stiff. Don't be too casual naman na masyado tayong confident. Just be engaging. Again, inulit ko na siya. Ulitin ko lang ulit. It's a suitability conversation. So just be conversational about it. It's a two-way street. You can ask questions as well, and they will ask the questions, obviously, for your interview. Kasi ginigauge nila yung suitability mo for the role, not just your knowledge and skills, but also your personality and your behavior. So be engaging. And then lastly, highlight relevant achievements. Again, anything na relevant lang. Don't say anything na hindi relevant unless you're building rapport and if you have time to build rapport. But if your first attempt didn't work, huwag mo nang ulitin kasi sayang yung oras. Baka ikaw lang yung masaktan kasi hindi naman sila nag-engage, di ba? Hindi nila pinapansin yung mga personal details mo na sinasabi. So, focus on more professional stuff. And optionally, that you can do, which we actually appreciate, anyone who's an HR here might actually appreciate it, follow up with a thank you note, because it just shows us that you're really willing to or eager to start the company, and talagang na-appreciate yung time and effort na ginugol namin lahat and nating lahat sa interviewer. Also, during that follow-up note, you can also ask like, what would be the next step in the process? How long till I hear back about the results and all that? It's a really good way to engage with them kasi not only you're building that connection with the interviewer, but you're showing us that talagang gusto mo magtrabaho sa amin, di ba? So, yes, thank you so much for everyone na nagstay tuned sa ating webinar today, and I'm free to answer any questions if you guys have any. And good luck as well on your interviews. If you have questions na hindi nyo matatanong today, or you prefer to ask it personally, you can send me a message on Facebook or on LinkedIn or on Instagram, or my email is also there. Thank you so much. Do we have questions from the...
Yes. So
Uh-huh.
we can start with the questions. Huh? Actually, there are 3 questions that was given
Mhm.
During the ano. So I'll just share my screen lang.
Sure.
Yes. Hindi naman siya ganun kahirap. Thank you for that, RJ. It was very, very detailed. Okay. Then, wait a second, sorry.
Yeah, I think there's a
This one.
I
Okay.
keep preparing. Okay, go on.
Ayan. Okay, so first question is, do they still conduct online interviews or is it back to face-to-face?
Mhm. With private sectors, right now I'm actually my answers is going to be like in between, like either a private or a public. But most of the time, if it's private sectors, usually, especially if you're just here in Victoria, most of the time it's going to be face to face. But don't hesitate to ask if you can have it online, if of course their technology is available. Like baka mamaya wala naman sila masyadong like Zooms or access to Teams, diba? So hindi talaga sila makakapag virtual. But if you want to have a face-to-face interview, or if you want to have an online interview, that is totally fine. In the BC Public Service, if you're remote, then obviously online. If you're in Victoria, sometimes they also would prefer virtual pag sa BC Public Service. One, because they're just very accommodating and inclusive sa mga tao na mas kinakabahan pag nasa harap ng tao, di ba? They also just the bottom line is don't hesitate to ask if or to request if you want an online or a face-to-face kung saan kayo mas komportable. They're very inclusive about it, both private and public. Of course, just have to ask, professionally, like, would it be possible if it can be an online interview?
Mhm.
Mga ganyan, you can just tell them your reasons why, and then, or if you prefer face to face, then sabihin mo face to face. Ganun lang. Just be professional when you ask, but most of the time they will accommodate it. If it's public, usually it's virtual. If it's private, it's usually face to face.
I have a follow-up question with that. Would that affect the candidate's chance of getting the job?
One, no, kasi it's not part of. Well, it really depends. So let's say ang work is sa food service.
Mhm.
Um, and then sasabihin nila face to face, but you prefer online. Pag sinabi
Mhm.
nila bakit mo gustong online, so sabihin mo na lang you're more comfortable in an online setting, or let's say may family ka, so you have to look out for them, blah blah blah. But if let's say alam mo yun, yung reason mo is I'm not very good with people, or mga ganun. Syempre mag-work ka sa customer service, di ba? So parang iba tayong humarap sa tao, di ba? Parang ganon. Although they won't really take it against you, um, it's not really part of your competency. It's not part of your skill. It's not part of your professional background. So
Mhm.
technically dapat hindi ka ratean kung gusto mo ba ng online or face-to-face. Walang bearing yun dapat sa interview. But again, it depends on the industry that you might be applying for.
Okay. Thank you for that, RJ. That's very clear. So another question. How do I address the employers here during the interview? Should I call them ma'am or sir? Kasi 'di ba sa Pilipinas, kailangan may title eh.
Yes.
Oo.
That's true. Here, sa Pilipinas, masyado tayong sanay ng ma'am and sir. Dito, hindi sila sanay ng ganon. Usually, if you want to be more professional, you can address them with Mr. or Miss and then their last name. But most of the time, if they don't like that, they will tell you that "Oh, you can call me John or you can call me Ryan." Mga ganon. So, sasabihin naman nila, usually first name basis. But if you, as an Asian, mas wary tayo of being professional and respectful.
Mhm.
So you can just start with Mr. or Miss and then the last name. But if you don't know their first and last name, just call them by their first names.
Okay.
They're
Thank
okay with that unless sasabihin nila na no, you should call me by Mr. blah blah blah. So sinabi nila
or
yun, then ganun.
okay. Or they would say, okay, call me a doctor or
Yes, mga
honorable
ganon.
or something like that.
Yes. You
'Di
should
ba?
call me honorable ganyan. Pag
Yeah,
gusto nila, edi go. Pero
okay.
kung, pero kung hindi, they're totally fine with it. Hindi nila
Okay.
ine-expect na yun yung itatawag mo sa kanila, even if they have designations.
Okay. So another question. Are the interviews with the Canadian employer more situational or more based on your background experience with work and personal life? I think you explained this in detail, but just
Mhm.
a quick answer.
Yeah, sure. So again, with the private sectors, mostly it's traditional type of interviews and traditional questions,
Mhm.
and possibly a knowledge-based question, which is, yung traditional is mostly your personal life and all that in your background, diba? With knowledge and skill-based, obviously it's more professional, like kung paano ba mag-count X plus Y equals Z, mga ganon, diba? So, ganon
Mhm.
siya. But for public sectors, it's mostly traditional, a mix of competency and knowledge based. So competency, situational ngayon, tell us about a time, give us a time, blah blah blah, and then knowledge based, which is skills mo. Yung education and personal, usually ginagamit lang siya pag sa public sector. Usually ginagamit lang siya for screening, which is for resumes mo lang and all that.
Okay. So you really need to research talaga ano kung anong sector ka. Kasi
Yes.
baka
Apart from that, I'm not sure if they've mentioned, but I'm pretty sure they mentioned it sa resume. Always tailor your resume sa job
mm-mm.
description. Kaya kailangan
Yes.
mong basahin talaga yung job description kasi usually yun nga sometimes, most of the time actually, may mga tools kaming ginagamit na
Mhm.
mag-screen in. Kasi syempre, sa 100 na applicant, hindi na may iisa-isahin yan. Masyadong madami yan.
Mm-mm.
Unless na lang talaga sobrang small company, di ba?
That's ATS, right?
It depends. Depende
Ah,
sa
okay.
system. Pero
Mhm.
yes, may mga ganon, mga ATS or mga CRM, mga ganon-ganon or
Mhm.
anything. Um, it really depends on the company. Pero pag mga malalaking companies, so let's say public sector or mga
Mhm.
big incorporations, usually we have a system na filter na agad yung mga applicants based on mga sagot nila. So,
Keywords.
keywords. So,
Mhm.
kailangan basahin mo talaga yung job description and make
Okay.
sure as to be as detailed.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Very detailed explanation again, RJ. So another question. Nasagot mo na to kanina eh.
Mhm.
But is STAR method applicable in Canadian interviews, especially in the public sector? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
And
Okay.
not just in public sector, in all types of interviews na dati na nasa Philippines ako tinuturuan namin sila to use
Mhm.
the STAR method. Even if hindi naman uso sa atin sa Pinas yung STAR method, but tinuturo namin siya because
Yes.
it's not just the method itself,
Mhm.
but it actually how it actually helps your answer to be more clear, understandable, and organized. Like hindi ka pa balik-balik kung saan.
Wait. Okay. So during the interview, when can I ask about the salary and other benefits? Oh, so salary and benefits na tayo.
Yes. Yes. So that's very common. That's a very common question. When can I ask about the salary and other benefits? Usually, pag may screening question, you can actually ask there. Hindi naman siya masama na tatanungin mo because wala namang sa Pilipinas parang medyo red flag siya kasi parang bad siya na
Mhm.
parang pera agad, 'di ba? Iniisip ng iba. Pero to be honest, like personally kahit nung nasa Pinas, I don't think that's such a bad thing because as tao tayo, magtatrabaho tayo. Yun naman talaga yung tinrabaho natin. Hindi naman tayo nag-a-apply para libre or para, 'di ba, para wala lang. So that's fine if you're going to ask about the salary and any point in time during the screening or at the end of the interview and all that. You can ask about it if it's not already posted. If it's posted, like nakasama na siya dun sa posting, then syempre, um, hindi na yun yung tatanungin mo. Tatanong mo na is like, ano yung range or ano yung mga offer, ganyan-ganyan. But most of the time, they're just gonna give you a range until the actual process is done. Kasi they would have to tie in and consider yung experiences mo and
Okay.
then and all that. So, bibigyan ka nila ng range but don't push na magbigay sila ng specific na hindi gusto ko ng eksaktong salary.
Mhm.
Ano yung magkano yung eksaktong salary? Hindi talaga namin malalaman yun kasi it really depends on all
Okay.
factors, magkano yung budget and all that. But um, in terms of when, you can ask that anytime.
Okay. So, at least mas okay siguro 'no, na you would ask that after the interview process na lang?
Yeah,
'No, kasi
interview
parang ang
after.
pangit naman na umpisa pa lang, "Okay, how much is this salary?" 'Di ba?
Yeah, well, yeah, no worry. Actually, wala namang problema. Pero yes, much probably the best place to or the best time to ask it is after the interview.
Okay. Thank you for that. So,
Mhm.
another question. What if I got sick unexpectedly during the interview? Can I ask to reschedule it? Will that affect my chance in getting the job?
Um, to answer the question, can I ask to reschedule it? Yes. Will that affect my chance in getting the job? No. One, because hindi naman natin kontrolado ang katawan natin kung magkakasakit tayo or something, di ba? Pero again, we just have to be mindful kung kailan natin gusto ipa-reschedule
Mhm.
or kung ilang beses na tayo magpapa-reschedule, kung ano-anong rason. Usually, okay lang, sige, magpa-reschedule tayo once kasi may problema, nagkasakit, or nagkaroon ng unexpected thing. Pero kung alam mo yung kung sunod-sunod ka na magpapa-reschedule, parang medyo off na siya. Kasi syempre, that means you're not taking into consideration the time of other people. Kasi, lalo na kung sa busy public service where it's a panel interview, mahirap mag-schedule ng tatlong mga directors in one time, di ba? So, mahirap maghanap ng oras na mag-meet yung tatlong yun. So, medyo mahirap siya. But feel free to say that you want to reschedule for whatever purposes, kahit hindi ka lang may sakit or anything, if may emergency, feel free to do that. Most of the time, they will be willing to reschedule it. Unless
Oh,
talaga hindi na pwede.
yes. Okay. Thank you for that. So, when can I ask for a follow-up to know if I got the job after the interview? So,
Mhm.
naninigurado.
Sinigurado. For a
Yeah.
follow-up, for a follow-up, it's always nice after the interview, like within 24 hours after the interview, you're just gonna send up a follow-up email and then asking them when you can hear back. So it's always nice because again, it shows us enthusiasm and interest. But don't expect right away na sasabihin nila, oh, ikaw na yung nakuha. Because we'd have to consider na, syempre, i-deliberate pa and all
Mhm.
that, titingnan. Pero just within that 24 hours after your
Okay.
interview, it's always good to ask that follow-up. And when can you hear back? Hindi yung sasabihin mo na, did I get the job na ba? Parang ganon.
Mhm.
Just ask them, what's the next step? How long will I hear back
Mhm.
uh, about the results? Mga ganon.
Follow-up ko lang diyan.
Mhm,
Based on your experience when you're hiring
mhm.
applicants, usually mga ilang araw?
Sa sa private sector madali lang kasi
Mhm.
sa private sector pag nagustuhan ka nila pwede ka na nilang i-email agad kinabukasan or that
Okay.
same day, di ba? Sa public sector medyo matagal because there's a process, mga hinihintay pa and all that, mga kailangan mag-deliberate pa lahat ng panel, may mga review period pa, mga gustong humingi ng feedback, mga ganun-ganun. So bago i-announce yung actual winner. So
Mhm.
matagal siya sa public service, but for private companies it can be very quick.
Okay. So at least okay pala na magtanong to ask
Mhm,
them like after the interview or maybe the day after the interview to
mhm.
follow up kung okay kung may
Like what's the
susunod pa
next
bang
step?
interview o yes or the next step.
Yes, or like
Okay.
how soon can I hear back about the
O kasi
results?
ang
Mga
hirap
ganon.
kasi na maging hangin ka, 'di ba?
Yes. And most of the time they will tell you naman like, oh, we're just gonna be deliberating this, please give us a few days or a week, mga ganon. So at least
Okay.
hindi ka mangungulit for the whole, alam mo, hindi
Yes.
ka nagkaka-anxiety yung buong linggo dahil hindi mo alam. So
True.
maganda
Oh,
yung magsabi ka
anxiety
na.
tapos ubos na yung funds mo. Alam mo na,
Oo,
'di ba?
kakaisip mo na ba yan isang linggo pa? Ano ba yan,
Oo.
isang linggo na? So at
Mm.
least alam mo kung kailan, masaset mo yung expectations mo when you hear back.
True. Okay, thank you. And yeah, is it okay to ask for feedback naman ba after an interview?
As in HR, that's actually a big yes.
Mhm.
One, kasi we like na nagbibigay ng feedback. Not because, alam mo yun, para, ang feedback kasi is not to pinpoint kung ano yung mali mo.
Mhm.
It's something that you could improve on. And that will really help kasi once na meron akong job na in-applyan dati na hindi ako nakapasa, tapos humingi ako ng feedback. And then, after a few weeks, ako na yung, ako parang kinuha, minessage na lang nila ako na kinuha na nila ako. Kasi, one, because they like that I had the feedback. Kasi, I was very proactive na talagang nag-show daw ako ng interest na gusto kong matuto and gusto kong mag-work sa kanila. So, alam mo yun. So, malaking help siya na pag mag-ask ka ng feedback. One, kasi it shows your interest again. And
Mhm.
napapanindigan mo yung sinasabi mo na, I'm into professional development and all that. I'm into learning and all that.
Mhm.
Tapos kung hindi ka mag-ask ng feedback, parang alam mo yun, parang asar talo ka. So, mas magandang mag-ask ka ng feedback because you can never know kung ano yung mga na-miss mo na hindi mo napansin na dapat pala nasabi mo, mga ganun. So, marami kang madidiscover na mga constructive criticisms from the interview itself.
Okay. Thank you for that. And last question from the no more. One question from the chat box. How should you respond if during the interview they ask you if you're willing to work more than 20 hours per week? This was asked by Crystal.
Okay.
Medyo ano to ah. Yeah.
No worries, medyo specific, but that's
Yes.
fine. So for that, it really depends. If you're someone who cannot work more than 20 hours because of your limitations, just be honest about it. Wag yung ipilit na sasabihin yung yes kasi para lang ano, baka kasi syempre status niyo yung ano nakaproblema.
Mhm.
But just tell them that as of now, my permit only limits me to work maximum of 20 hours. I'm only limited to that. But during the summer, I am actually free to work full time or during my breaks. So I can be flexible during those times. But during my study period, I'm only allowed to work 20 hours. Maybe we can find ways for me to work part time. Mga ganon. Maybe we can look at options for me to work part time while I'm studying and full time in the summer. Yun, pwede mong sabihin yun. Maganda siya kasi ang maganda doon sa pag ganun yung way ng sagot mo is that hindi mo sinasabi na, no, hindi ako pwedeng magtrabaho ng more than 20 hours. Pero pag ganun lang yung sinabi mo, like, yun lang, hindi mo sila binibigyan ng options. So always give them the option na, I can only work like this, but how about we talk about options on me working part-time if there's an opportunity here and then I can work full-time in the summer, mga ganun. Bibigyan mo sila ng options. At least, kasi sometimes hindi nila alam yun eh. Hindi naman nila agad may isip yun. Pero kung ikaw ang mag-offer ng option na yun, at least it's giving you the it's you're giving yourself a higher chance of getting hired kasi binibigyan mo sila ng possibility na oo nga no pwede palang gawin yun, di ba?
True.
Yun.
There's another question. Do you have
Mhm.
any tips for those looking for a part-time job in a bank? And then follow up niya, are banks open during weekends? So I was browsing job postings in Indeed and saw that they prefer those who's willing to work on weekends and weeknights. I asked so we could tailor my schedule according to the banking culture in Victoria.
Mhm. Oh, okay. So the tips for those looking for a part-time job in a bank. So right now, banks are open usually Mondays to Fridays unless it's in what do you call that? Sa mall. So usually may Saturday sila, but there's usually no Sundays talaga and the holidays.
Mhm.
Browsing. Sa tips in terms of looking for a part-time job in a bank. I haven't had any experience as a bank ever,
Mhm.
but I think what's most important is that one, I have a friend actually na na-interview siya sa bank because of his connection. So because of his, network. So try to do that. If you think, applying through Indeed is not enough, try to go to the banks themselves and see if they have, if they have hiring. Bring your resume, that's fine. Huwag kayong mahiya magdala ng resume sa kanila kasi okay lang yun. Magdala kayo ng resume and personally be there. Kasi who knows, they might just not have posted it and then naghahanap pala talaga sila and then if there's a manager pwede na kayong interviewin kung hindi man sila kung wala man silang opening let's say in a few days
Mhm.
at least they can keep your resume and then they can contact you right away na interview ka na nila so the moment na magkaroon ng opening pwede ka na nilang i-hire ganun
Okay.
and also your network network to many people talagang makipag-friends kayo sa kung kani-kanino because it's very important. Your network is your net
True.
worth. The more network you
Yes.
have, the more chances you have on getting the jobs that you want to actually apply for. Ako nakapasok lang din ako sa government because of a friend. So,
Mhm.
doon ako nag-start na may kakilala ako, sinabi niya sa akin yung job na to, ni-refer niya ako,
Mm.
nag-interview and all that. Nakapasok ako.
Okay.
So, yun.
So RJ, beke naman.
Ah,
'Di ba? Sa mga
yes.
naghahanap ng trabaho, yeah. So,
Correct.
again, tama nga yung sinabi ni RJ, I just want to emphasize on that. So, as early as now, try to volunteer. Or UVic, UPC is open for volunteers po. So, from here, you can have more network.
Yes.
Okay, so last
Correct.
question, RJ. So, ask ko lang, gaano po tinatagal ang interview?
Mhm. Um, Usually for BC Public Service, pag public sector, it usually lasts from 45 minutes to an hour kasi nga
Mm.
time siya, tapos kailangan very detailed na answers mo and all that. Pag sa private sector, usually wala naman silang pake,
Mhm.
sasabihin lang nila kailan kailan ito yung start time ng interview. So, sa private sector, mas may freedom ka to speak more or speak less as you want. You can also engage more, like, mag-usap kayo about, mag-build rapport kayo, mag-usap kayo about personal life and all that. Mas may freedom kayo in terms of private sectors. They don't really have um, a set amount of time. Pero syempre, more than 1 hour is sobra na yun. Parang sobrang tagal na nung 1.5 hour na interview nakakapagod din yun. So just be considerate of their time din. Yun lang.
Okay. Thank you for that, RJ. Thank you for today. Very, very helpful. So, I guess wala naman ng tanong. And everybody, hello, are you still there? Okay. Please, can you please open your videos po? Para magpa-picture lang po tayo sa ating resource speaker. Okay po ba? I'll stop the... Okay. Thank you so much. Okay.